The CEO had the single dad's truck towed. The tow truck's yellow lights were still spinning when Daniel Reyes came sprinting out of the loading dock, his uniform shirt soaked through with sweat, his hands raised, his voice cracking as he screamed one word over and over: "Wait. Wait. That's my truck. Please, wait." Nobody waited. If you have ever watched someone lose everything in the space of 90 seconds, you already know how quiet the world gets right before it happens. The forklift stopped humming. The other warehouse workers froze mid-stride. And in that silence, an old blue Ford pickup, the only thing standing between Daniel Reyes and total ruin, rolled backward onto a flatbed and disappeared down Cypress Avenue like it had never existed at all. Before you keep watching, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is about to show you exactly what happens when the person you crush on your way up turns out to be the only person who can save you on your way down. Stay until the end. You will not see this ending coming. Daniel was 34 years old, and for the last 6 years, he had been raising his daughter Mia alone. His wife, Carla, had died in a car accident on a rainy October night when Mia was only 4. There had been no savings, no life insurance payout large enough to matter, and no family nearby to help carry the weight. So Daniel carried it himself. He worked the early shift at Halden Logistics, a mid-size shipping and distribution company on the outskirts of the city, loading pallets onto trucks from 5 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, and then he drove for a rideshare app most evenings until Mia's bedtime allowed him to stop. His old Ford truck was not just a vehicle. It was his job, his second job, and his lifeline, all at once. It carried him to Halden Logistics every morning. It carried strangers to the airport every night. It carried Mia to school, to the pediatrician, to her one extracurricular activity, a Saturday morning art class that cost $22 a month and that Daniel would have sold his own blood to keep paying for. That morning, Daniel had parked in the same visitor overflow spot he always used when the employee lot filled up early, a strip of gravel near the east fence that the warehouse staff had used for years without incident. What Daniel did not know, what none of the warehouse floor workers knew, was that Halden Logistics had a new CEO. Her name was Vanessa Calloway, and she had taken over the company 4 months earlier after her father, the founder, stepped down following a stroke. Vanessa was 39, sharp, brilliant with numbers, and terrified, though she would never have used that word, of being seen as anything less than absolute in her authority. She had inherited a company that whispered behind her back, board members who doubted a woman in her position, executives twice her age who smiled at her in meetings and undermined her the moment she left the room. Vanessa had decided, somewhere in those 4 exhausting months, that the only way to survive was to never let a single rule be broken in her presence. Not one, especially not in front of people who were watching to see if she had what it took. That morning, she was walking the perimeter of the property with the new head of facilities, a nervous man named Ben Ostrovsky, doing exactly the kind of inspection a new CEO does when she is trying to prove she notices everything. And there, parked on a gravel strip near the east fence, sat a beat-up blue Ford truck with a faded parking permit from a different lot altogether. "Whose is that?" Vanessa said. It was not really a question. Ben stammered that it belonged to one of the floor workers, that people parked there sometimes when the main lot filled up, that it had never been an issue before. "It's an issue now," Vanessa said. "Tow it. I want this lot clean by end of day. If we let one person park wherever they want, we'll have 40 people parking wherever they want by Friday." Ben tried, weakly, to push back. He mentioned that towing an employee's only vehicle without warning seemed harsh. Vanessa did not raise her voice. She simply said, "I did not ask if it seemed harsh. I asked you to tow it," and walked away, already thinking about the 4 other things on her calendar that morning, already forgetting the truck existed. She had no idea whose truck it was. She had no idea about Mia, or Carla, or the rideshare app, or the $22 a month for art class. She only saw a rule broken in front of an employee who was watching her decide whether to enforce it. She made the call in 6 seconds. It would take her exactly 4 hours to understand what those 6 seconds had cost. To understand why the sight of that flatbed turning the corner felt like the ground opening beneath him, you have to understand what an average week looked like for Daniel Reyes. His alarm went off at 4:15 every morning, and by 4:40 he was already dressed, lunch packed, coffee poured into a dented thermos that had belonged to Carla's father. He would wake Mia gently at 4:50, help her into the clothes he had laid out the night before, and drive her 2 miles to his elderly neighbor Rosa's apartment, where Rosa fed her breakfast and walked her to school at 7:30 in exchange for $40 a week and the occasional home-cooked dinner Daniel brought over on Sundays. Then it was straight to Halden Logistics for a 10-hour shift on his feet, lifting, stacking, scanning, moving pallets that weighed more than he did, under fluorescent lights that made every hour feel identical to the one before it. After his shift, 3 days a week, he switched his phone over to the rideshare app and drove strangers to the airport, to bars, to hospitals, to wherever they needed to go, smiling and making small talk through exhaustion that sat behind his eyes like sand. He was usually home by 9. He read to Mia for 15 minutes, no matter how tired he was, because it was the only guaranteed piece of the day that belonged only to the two of them. Then he did it again the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that, for 6 years, without complaint, because complaining was a luxury that required someone else to be listening, and Daniel had learned a long time ago that nobody was. The truck sat at the center of every single piece of that routine. Without it, there was no way to get Mia to Rosa's. There was no way to get to Halden Logistics on time, since the nearest bus line ran 40 minutes late more often than not and did not begin service until 6. There was no rideshare income, which made up nearly a third of his total earnings some months. Losing the truck did not mean losing a convenience. It meant the entire architecture of his life, built patiently over 6 exhausting years, collapsing in the time it took a tow operator to hook a chain to a bumper. Daniel found out his truck was gone during his 15-minute break. He walked outside to move it before the lot inspection everyone had been gossiping about all morning, and where his truck should have been, there was only a rectangle of gravel, slightly darker than the ground around it, like a shadow of something that used to matter. He ran. He ran toward the gate just in time to see the flatbed turning onto Cypress Avenue, and he screamed, and nobody stopped, because nobody could hear a man's entire life falling apart over the sound of a diesel engine. He called the towing company from the guard shack, hands shaking so badly he had to redial twice. The impound fee was $340, non-negotiable, cash or card, due immediately, plus a daily storage fee of $40 starting at midnight. Daniel had $81 in his checking account. He knew this number the way parents who live paycheck to paycheck always know their number, the way it lives behind their eyes at every gas station and every grocery store checkout. He sat down on the curb outside the guard shack and put his head in his hands, and for the first time in 6 years, in front of people he barely knew, Daniel Reyes cried. It was Priya Anand, a young supervisor from the shipping office, who found him there. She did not ask permission. She walked back inside, marched straight up to the 4th floor, past the assistant who tried to stop her, and into the glass-walled conference room where Vanessa Calloway was reviewing quarterly projections with 3 members of the board. "You need to come outside," Priya said. Now. Vanessa, irritated at the interruption, said she was in the middle of something important. "With respect," Priya said, and her voice did not shake even a little, "you're about to be a lot more important to a 6-year-old girl than you realize, and not in a good way." That sentence stopped the room. Priya told them. She told them about Daniel, about Carla, about Mia, about the 2 jobs and the rideshare app and the truck that was not just a truck. She told them the impound fee was $340 and that Daniel had 81. She told them Daniel had never once been late, never once complained, and had covered another employee's overtime shift on Christmas Eve 2 years ago without being asked, because the other man had a newborn at home and Daniel remembered what that first Christmas without enough money felt like. Vanessa sat very still. One of the board members, an older man named Frank Delacroix who had known Daniel's late father-in-law decades earlier through the trucking union, said quietly, "Vanessa, do you understand what you just did?" She did not answer right away. In the silence, something in her chest that had been clenched tight for 4 months, since the day she walked into her father's office and sat down in his chair for the first time and felt like a fraud in her own family's company, cracked open just slightly. She thought about her own father, about the year she was 9 years old and their car had been repossessed outside their apartment building, about her mother crying at the kitchen table while Vanessa pretended to do homework and listened to every word. She had built an entire career, an entire identity, around never again being the person standing on a curb watching something taken from her. And in trying to prove she was strong enough to run this company, she had become, for one warehouse worker on one ordinary Tuesday, the exact thing she had spent her whole life running from. There was more sitting underneath that memory than Vanessa had let herself admit in years. Her father, Walter Calloway, had built Halden Logistics from a single delivery van into a company with 4 regional warehouses, and he had done it with a philosophy Vanessa had grown up hearing at the dinner table almost every night: rules exist because people cannot be trusted to do the right thing on their own. It was a philosophy that had made Walter rich and, Vanessa privately believed, had made him lonely in ways he never once acknowledged out loud. When Walter's stroke forced him out of the company 4 months earlier, the board had installed Vanessa not because they believed in her, but because the alternative, an outside hire who might dismantle decades of the Calloway way, frightened them more. She had felt every one of their doubtful glances in every meeting since. She had responded to that fear the only way she knew how, by becoming stricter than her father had ever been, by treating every small mercy as a crack in the foundation, by mistaking rigidity for strength. Somewhere in the last 4 months, she had stopped asking whether a rule was right and started only asking whether it was being followed. Daniel Reyes's truck was simply the first time she had been forced, in front of witnesses, to see exactly where that instinct led. "Get me the impound lot's number," Vanessa said. Her voice was different now. "And get me Daniel Reyes." Down at the guard shack, Daniel was still sitting on the curb when his supervisor came out and told him the CEO wanted to see him. Daniel assumed he was being fired for causing a scene. He walked up to the 4th floor with his stomach in knots, rehearsing an apology he did not think he owed but felt too tired to refuse giving. When he stepped into the conference room, Vanessa Calloway stood up. She did not sit behind her desk and make him stand in front of it. She walked around the table and stood at eye level with him, and the first thing she said was, "Mr. Reyes, I made a mistake this morning, and it was not a small one. I want you to know that before anything else." Daniel did not know what to say. In 6 years of surviving, almost nobody in a position of power had ever apologized to him for anything. Vanessa explained that she had already called the impound lot and paid the fee and the first day's storage in full, and that a company driver was on the way to retrieve the truck personally and bring it back to the exact spot it had been towed from. She explained that she had asked HR to open a case file, not against Daniel, but against the policy itself, and against her own decision-making that morning. She told him, in front of Priya and Frank Delacroix and 2 other board members, that she had grown up in a household that once lost a car the same way, for reasons that felt just as arbitrary and just as devastating at the time, and that she should have asked one question before giving that order: whose truck is this, and what does it mean to them? She had not asked. She would not make that mistake again. Daniel, still standing there in his sweat-soaked uniform shirt, said the only thing he could think to say. "I just need to pick up my daughter by 4. You'll have your truck back by 2, Vanessa said. "And Mr. Reyes, take the rest of the day off, paid. Go be with her." But the story did not end with an apology and a truck returned. That would have been a fine ending, a decent ending, the kind of ending most people would have accepted gratefully and moved on from. What happened over the following weeks was something bigger, and it started because Frank Delacroix, sitting in that conference room, asked Vanessa a question she could not stop thinking about for days afterward. "How many Daniels do you think are working in this building right now, quietly surviving something you don't know about, one bad morning away from losing everything?" Vanessa did not know the answer, and it bothered her enough that she decided to find out. She spent the next 3 weeks doing something no CEO at Halden Logistics had done in over a decade. She walked the floor. Not for inspections. Not with a clipboard. She walked the floor and she talked to people. She learned that Marisol in the packing department was caring for a mother with early onset dementia and had been denied a shift change 3 times by a manager who did not want the paperwork hassle. She learned that a 19-year-old forklift operator named Jonah was sleeping in his car 2 nights a week because rent had gone up faster than his wages. She learned that the "no personal phone calls on the floor" policy, which she herself had reaffirmed in a memo just 6 weeks earlier, had once caused a woman named Teresa to miss the call telling her that her son had been hospitalized because her phone was locked in her locker per company rule. Vanessa brought all of this back to the board, and this time she did not ask permission to fix it. She restructured the company's emergency assistance fund, which had existed on paper for years but had never once been used because nobody knew how to apply for it, and the application required manager sign-off, which meant admitting weakness to the very people who controlled your schedule. She made it anonymous, automatic for verified emergencies under a certain dollar threshold, and funded it, in part, out of her own signing bonus, a fact she never announced publicly and that only came out months later when Priya mentioned it offhand to a local reporter doing a feature on the company. She changed the parking policy so that towing was always the absolute last resort, only after 2 written warnings, a posted notice period, and a direct conversation with the employee. She instituted quarterly, floor forums, where any employee could speak directly to leadership without a manager present, modeled loosely on the 15 minutes Priya had spent standing up to her in a conference room. The first floor forum was, by Vanessa's own later admission, a disaster. Fewer than a dozen employees showed up, most of them standing near the exit as though they expected to need it. The questions were guarded, testing, designed to see whether this was a real invitation or a trap dressed up as one. But Vanessa kept showing up, quarter after quarter, and she kept answering honestly even when the honest answer made her look unprepared or wrong. By the 4th forum, the room was standing room only, and Jonah, the 19-year-old forklift operator who had once slept in his car, stood up in front of nearly 200 coworkers and thanked Vanessa by name for the housing stipend program that had grown out of those very conversations. Frank Delacroix, who attended every forum quietly from the back row, told Vanessa afterward that he had not seen a room at Halden Logistics feel that alive in over 15 years. "Your father built machines that moved boxes," he said. "You're building something that moves people. Don't ever let anyone talk you out of that." And she did something else, something smaller but somehow the thing people at Halden Logistics talked about the longest. Every year on the anniversary of the day his truck was towed, Daniel Reyes got a card in his mailbox at work. It was never signed with anything more than a single letter, V, and it always said some version of the same thing. "Thank you for the reminder that policies are supposed to serve people, not the other way around." Daniel, for his part, did not become a symbol or a cause. He kept loading pallets. He kept driving Mia to her Saturday art class. But something had shifted for him too. 6 weeks after the incident, Vanessa personally recommended him for a lead position on the shipping floor, not out of guilt, she told him plainly, but because Priya and 2 other supervisors had independently flagged him as one of the most reliable people in the building long before any of this happened, and Vanessa was simply the first person with the authority to act on it who bothered to ask. The raise that came with the promotion was not enormous, but it was enough that Daniel could finally stop driving nights 3 times a week, enough that he could be home for dinner with Mia more often than not, enough that the $22 a month for art class stopped feeling like a small miracle and started feeling like something he had actually earned the right to give her. In the weeks that followed the promotion, something in the rhythm of Daniel's life began to soften in ways he had almost forgotten were possible. He was no longer setting 2 alarms, one for the warehouse and one for the rideshare app. He started sleeping 7 hours instead of 5. He noticed, almost with surprise, that he had energy left at the end of the day, not enough to change the world, but enough to sit on the kitchen floor and build a cardboard castle with Mia instead of falling asleep halfway through a bedtime story with his shoes still on. Rosa noticed the difference too. "You look like a person again," she told him one Sunday, handing back a container of enchiladas she had insisted on keeping. He laughed, and realized it was the first time in longer than he could remember that laughing had not felt like an effort. Mia, now 7, still did not fully understand why her father sometimes got quiet and a little tearful when he talked about the day the truck came back. All she knew was that her dad picked her up from school more often now, and that once, a woman in a sharp gray blazer had come to one of her Saturday art classes, sat quietly in the back for 20 minutes, watched Mia paint a lopsided but determined picture of a blue truck, and left an envelope with the instructor before slipping out. Inside the envelope was enough to cover art class for the rest of the year, along with a note that read, "Keep painting trucks. They matter more than people think." Vanessa never told anyone at Halden Logistics that she visited that class. She never told anyone about the envelope. Some acts of repair are not meant to be witnessed by a boardroom. They are only meant to close a distance that opened, once, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, between a woman who was afraid